The Last of Us universe has some of the most intricate world building present in gaming. The unique apocalypse rooted in real science added an extra layer of terror. Add in greatly written characters and dynamics, and you have a series beloved by many. Given the many questions left in such a world ravaged by the cordyceps, it led to a lot of theories to be created. So for today's video, I compiled the most intriguing ones onto this iceberg chart. There is no real pattern, but I tried to go from most to least known, though there are some outliers here and there. Nevertheless, let's get started with the first tier. There are more immune survivors. This refers to a surgeon's entry you can find in the first installment of The Last of Us. The transcript goes as so. April 28.
Marlene was right. The girl's infection is like nothing I've ever seen. The cause of her immunity is uncertain. As we've seen in all past cases, the antigenic titers of the patient's cordyceps remain high in both the serum and the cerebrospinal fluid. Blood cultures taken from the patient rapidly grow cordyceps and fungal media in the lab. However, white blood cell lines, including percentages and absolute counts, are completely normal. There is no elevation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and an MRI of the brain shows no evidence of fungal growth in the limbic regions, which would normally accompany the prodrome of aggression in infected patients.
The statement, as you've seen in past cases, hints at the Fireflies experimenting on previous immune patients. However, using the context clues of the next few sentences, it's assumed the surgeon was referring to infected patients. Ellie's immunity was also addressed as an infection. Given the lack of any other evidence, it's safe to say Ellie is the only person immune to the cordyceps fungus. Jerry couldn't make a cure. Jerry Anderson, aka the main surgeon behind wanting to remove the mutated cordyceps in Ellie's brain, was often referred as the only man who can make a cure by Mel. When Joel killed him in the pursuit of freeing Ellie, it seems the Fireflies' remnants lost interest in making a cure. However, even if Jerry was allowed to experiment on the mutated fungus, he most likely wouldn't have been able to create an actual vaccine. Jerry had a bachelor's degree in biology, as well as being experienced in veterinarian practices. Despite this, there is a lot of work behind creating a vaccine for a global outbreak. Fans try to use this as an excuse for Joel's actions, but Naughty Dog director Neil Druckmann confirmed that Jerry would have made a cure given the chance. The cure never would have worked. Adding on to the last entry, this theory claims that the potential vaccine wouldn't have worked anyway. When looking into the intricacies of attempting to cure the cordyceps, there are many issues that arise. The obvious is that the cordyceps infection is fungal based. It infiltrates the brain and overrides the body completely. Once attached to the brainstem, there is no way to remove the organism without killing the host. Vaccines only work in viruses by strengthening the immune system. A vaccine wouldn't work on a fungal spore growing within the host's body. Even if the vaccine worked, there are also a very small margin of infected that could be cured. Bloaters, shamblers, and clickers would be way too far gone to be cured, as the fungal growths have already destroyed most of the body. Stalkers maybe could, but it would depend on the person. Most stalkers have the mushroom growths coming from the eyes and forehead, so removing those while keeping the host alive would be nearly impossible. Runners would be the only infected group that could be cured, but even then a mass majority of them are on the early stages of becoming a clicker. But ignoring the infected completely, who's to say the Fireflies wouldn't keep the vaccine for themselves and condemn the world to suffer? The whole save humanity pitch could just be a way to encourage potential members to join. Overall, there are way too many factors against the potential cure for it to have been effective. Still, that wasn't the point of part 1's ending. It all built up to show that Joel snuffed out the hope of a cure and later faced the consequences. With this covered, we can move on to tier 2. The Last of Us and Uncharted are in the same universe. Given that both games series were created by Naughty Dog, some fans have speculated that Uncharted and The Last of Us take place in the same universe. Outside of being developed by the same studio, there are references within both games. In Uncharted 4, you can find this record named Wait for the Kiss. In the prologue to The Last of Us Part 1, the same record can be found in Joel's home. Other evidence can be found in Uncharted 3, where a newspaper can be found warning about the cordyceps outbreak. In the same game, a firefly pendant can be found near a skeleton in a cave. Some minor references are an Uncharted board game in The Last of Us and a poster for The Last of Us comic in Uncharted 4. But the theory quickly falls apart when you try to connect the two stories. The cordyceps outbreak occurred in 2013, and the Uncharted 4 takes place in 2015. So unless the infected just avoid Nathan Drake and his supporting cast, this theory can be true. the cordyceps was made in a government lab. The first of a few theories revolving around the cordyceps' origins, this one suggests that the infection came from a secret government laboratory. The cordyceps in reality is a species of fungus that attaches itself to insects and hijacks their body. The infected insects then become a vessel for the mushroom to continue growing and sprouting out of their body. While incredibly disgusting to look at, thankfully it cannot infect humans, at least not the natural cordyceps. In order for the fungus to jump from infecting small insects to large humans, the fungus would need to be genetically modified. This is where the laboratory theory comes into play. The US government was in the process of creating a bioweapon when someone in the lab managed to contract the disease. They went home and eventually turned into a runner. From there, the fungal infection spread until it managed to take over America. Compared to the other theorized origins of the cordyceps, this one isn't that outlandish, but since there isn't much evidence to suggest humanity itself had experimented on the fungus until it mutated into a strain that could take over people, it's safe to say this theory isn't true. The fungus will be sentient in part 3. One of the more unique conspiracies about the cordyceps, this theory proposes that in the potential part 3 to The Last of Us, the fungus will become a sentient entity. It will interact with the player in some way, whether friendly or hostile. Those who support the theory compare the sentient cordyceps to the Flood from Halo 3. An incredibly intelligent hive mind society, the Flood seeks to take over all living creatures in the universe. While the cordyceps hasn't shown any signs of developing a hive mind, it would certainly add a new layer of nuance to the already complex story. But since there is no confirmation that Last of Us Part 3 will even exist, that means that this theory is simply speculation. Let's now move on to Tier 3. More Rat Kings exist. The first entry on Tier 3 theorizes that the Rat King Abby fought in the hospital basement isn't the only one. This amalgamation of the cordyceps was formed slowly over years of several infected being in such close proximity. Their fungal infections would begin to attract and they would eventually attach to each other. Eventually, you would end up with a giant mutated organism that oozes spores and toxic gas. The conditions to create something close to the Rat King are very specific, but technically possible. For another Rat King to exist, it would require multiple infected to be trapped in a small area undisturbed for over 20 years. These conditions can be recreated in many different locations, such as prisons, barracks, or even schools. But given how widespread the infection was in The Last of Us, it's definitely possible for more monstrous amalgams of spores and humans to exist, just waiting to be encountered. Joel is Ellie's real father. The next few theories revolve around the true parentage of a few characters. This one was a prevalent one that circulated around the release of The Last of Us in 2013. It claimed that Joel was actually Ellie's biological father, not just a father figure to her. The details depend on where you read the theory, but some common elements are present in each interpretation. Joel had a one-night stand with a fellow survivor, but the two split off the next morning and never contacted each other again. The woman would then later give birth to her daughter Ellie. Since Joel never even knew this woman was pregnant, he never considered that Ellie could be his biological daughter. But that's as far as the actual evidence goes, other than the fact that both characters reside in the Boston QZ. From what the audience learns about Joel and his character, it just doesn't seem too likely he'd impregnate someone and then never bother checking in on them. By the time Ellie meets him, he's emotionally closed off and treats Ellie as a nuisance. This theory being true also lessens the game's themes. The point of Joel and Ellie's relationship is that both were alone and desperately trying to find a purpose in life. Having them be related negates the message that true connections can come from anybody and anywhere. This one is the most popular theory, but unfortunately it just doesn't hold much weight. Jerry is Ellie's father. Another proposed claim is that Jerry Anderson is Ellie's biological father. Basically, while stationed in the Boston QZ with other Fireflies, Jerry met the woman who would become Ellie's mother. The two had a passionate night and Jerry would soon leave with his group back to Salt Lake City. Ellie then would be born soon after and Jerry would never bother checking in on her and her mother. There was no other evidence to even suggest this to be true, so we'll move on. Do keep this theory in mind though, since this comes into play later. Owen is Jerry's son. Jerry Anderson seems to be quite the playboy, as this series suggests that he is Owen's dad. Yeah, the same Owen that dated Abby. Freudology aside, the only evidence is that the two characters do look incredibly similar. They have similar facial structures, hairstyles, and even mannerisms. Both seem to be idealistic dreamers that struggle accepting reality as it is. Claiming that Jerry is Owen's father is completely misinterpreting why they are so similar, however. Abby is constantly reminded of Jerry whenever she is around Owen, which is why she constantly avoids him and pushes him away. Jerry's death at the hands of Joel is what pushed Abby down a destructive path of obsessing over revenge. So by having Owen look and act so similar to Jerry, it's supposed to be thematic, not literal. Tommy is Ellie's dad. The final entry on this tier is about, you guessed it, Ellie's biological father. This time, Tommy was the one that had a one-night stand with Ellie's mom, and that's how she was conceived. The evidence for this theory is a bit more sound compared to the previous ones. Tommy and Anna, Ellie's mother, were both fireflies. That already makes this more plausible than the other theories, but other pieces of evidence are a bit looser. The claims are that Ellie and Tommy both have brown hair and they're both gentle people. While there are similarities in the personalities of both characters, it's not enough to claim that they're blood related. Also, their hair color isn't that similar. Ellie's hair is dark brown, while Tommy has a dirty brown color scheme going on. And that's all for the Ellie biological father theories, since now it's time to move on to tier 4. The cordyceps came from GMO foods. Another proposed origin of the cordyceps fungus, the theory states that the infection started from genetically modified wheat. The reason behind this claim comes from reports of modified corn that produced its own insecticide that was fatal to humans. Due to the costs of developing a whole new strain of corn, businesses still use this deadly cob as a base for hundreds of other super strains. Since it took years for anyone to notice, modern day GMO corn still has about 4% of that original fatal insecticide present in the vegetable. However, take this entire story with a grain of salt. I tried researching these claims and found reports of only some strains of corn containing harmful insecticides in Mexico. This theory still holds some major evidence behind it, however. In part 1, there are newspapers that report the FDA investigating tainted crops covered in a mysterious mold. These plants were imported from South America and Mexico, leading to many companies recalling their food products. It was unfortunately too late, as days later the infection would reach the general population and spread like wildfire through humans. So while not 100% confirmed, the suspected origin being genetically modified crops tainted with the cordyceps is the most plausible answer compared to some other theories. Ellie and Abby are half-sisters. When the trailers for The Last of Us Part 2 first came out, a lot of theories about who Abby was were discussed. A common one was that Abby was Ellie's mother, and the game would follow two storylines that would somehow intersect. As more information came out about Part 2, this theory was quickly debunked. But amidst the hype, a new one was created. That theory is that Ellie is actually Abby's half-sister. The claims are pretty hefty, revolving around Jerry having a one-night stand with a nurse named Anna, who eventually gave birth to her only daughter, a young girl named Ellie. A few years later, Jerry would sleep with another woman who then gave birth to a second daughter named Abby. Regretting having left Anna with their newborn in the Boston QZ, Jerry accepted Abby as his child and raised her with other fireflies. The evidence revolved around the character models for Ellie and Abby looking similar. The theory claims that both have the same hair color and a similar face shape. Other than that, nothing else suggests the two are related. The plausibility of this theory falls apart when you consider the geography of The Last of Us. Ellie was born in a Boston QZ, which is on the east coast of the United States. Abby was raised and presumably born in a Salt Lake City Firefly outpost, which is stationed in the American Midwest. The two locations are about 2,363 miles apart. Add in the random elements of a collapsed society and the dangers of the infected, that is a pretty hefty trip for a single man to cross. So while an interesting theory that would add more nuance to the complexity of Part 2's narrative, it just isn't possible when looking into the intricate details. Abby is immune. This theory is pretty brief, so it'll be a quick entry, but fans speculate that Abby was also immune to the cordyceps. Whether through a mutated fungal growth or an enhanced immune system, Abby shares the same symptoms as Ellie. The same theory suggests that Jerry knew this but didn't want to sacrifice his own daughter for a potential cure, so he waited until Ellie eventually showed up. The only piece of evidence is when Jerry and Marlene are discussing what to do with Ellie, and Marlene asks,
And what if this was Abby?
Jerry's response is a scoff followed by silence. Honestly, the point of this theory is to paint Jerry in a bad light and make Joel seem justified in massacring the hospital. While it's up to you to decide if Joel was in the right, the theory doesn't hold any weight outside of that. With this covered, we can move on to tier 5. Joel, Ellie, and Abby are infected with a mutated strain of the cordyceps. This one is my personal favorite. The theory claims that all the playable story characters, basically Joel, Ellie, and Abby, are infected with a mutated strain of the cordyceps that gives them their in-game abilities. So the ability to hear enemies through walls, heal wounds by bandaging your arms, and eating expired pills to learn new things, all comes from a mutated version of the cordyceps virus. This theory also claims that all three are immune in their own ways, but I couldn't find much info on that. If this theory is true, that would also mean that every character in No Return also has the cordyceps in them, which raises more questions than answers. Do they know they're infected? How would they feel knowing that they basically gained superpowers through the infection? Would this superpowered immunity pass on to Mel or Dina's baby? While most likely not true, it's still interesting to think about. The Fireflies are harvesting Ellie's organs for David. This theory proposes a sinister angle on Ellie's surgery. It claims that David, the cannibal leader from Part 1, survived his fight with Ellie. David would then hire the Fireflies or convince them somehow to lie to Ellie about creating a cure. This would put her guard down and allow the surgeons to remove her organs. Those fresh immune organs would then be transplanted into David, turning him into, and I quote, an immortal flesh god. Yeah, this is definitely on the stranger side of fan theories here. If true, it makes Joel's choice to save Ellie more reasonable. Ellie is slowly turning. Ellie's immunity was always a side effect of her initial infection. The likely answer for why infected symptoms don't show is because her mutated cordyceps is killing off the harmful cells before they can grow. This is why she can breathe spores all day and handle bites like a warrior. But what if all this was just a case of infection kicking in slowly? As she grows older and the cordyceps grows within her, more symptoms begin to show. This is why she seems to be more aggressive in part 2 compared to the flashbacks where she was a few years younger. Eventually, she'll realize that she is turning into an infected runner, but there's nothing she can do to stop it. The idea that Ellie's mutated cordyceps is actually harming her is brought up again later, so keep this in mind. But as for slowly turning, I doubt it. She's been infected with the mutated fungus since she was 14. By the end of part 2, she's at least 19 years old. If nothing showed up in those 5 years, there's a good chance symptoms are going to randomly show up in the future. But until we see her again in a potential part 3, we won't know for sure. Let's now move on to tier 6.
Sarah's soul is in Joel's watch. A really unique one to kick off the 6th tier. This theory suggests after Sarah was killed by the Fedra soldier, her soul was transferred into Joel's watch. The cracked face represents how she basically controls time now, and that every time Joel is killed, she rewinds to when he was alive. Joel is effectively immortal until he or Sarah decides it's time for him to go. This is why Joel survives near-death experiences multiple times, from taking on bloaters alone to killing hundreds of soldiers at once. His death in part 2 was because Sarah and Joel decided it was time for him to go. Joel confessed to Sarah that he's tired, he's served his purpose, and is ready to be reunited with his daughter. His only request was that Sarah protect Ellie instead. Once Ellie inherits his watch, the power extends to her. The evidence for this theory is basically gameplay. It's meant to showcase how Sarah gave Joel and Ellie infinite chances to survive, replicating the gameplay of The Last of Us. When you die and are given those loading screen tips, that is Sarah guiding the player. If you really want to get into the weeds of the theory, we the players are Sarah. By controlling Joel and Ellie, the players are protecting them the way Sarah would. There is one major oversight with this theory, however, and that is being able to play as Abby. The player can die as many times as they want as Abby, and she will still be alive and well later. The theory tried to address this by claiming Abby is just built differently. While one of the more fleshed fan theories, it is a bit too supernatural to fit into The Last of Us grounded reality.
Animals can be infected with the cordyceps. In the final versions of The Last of Us Part 1 and 2, animals seem to be immune to the fungal infection. They only die to hungry runners or in traps set by human survivors. But the idea of infected animals with the cordyceps fungus was originally meant to be in The Last of Us 1. About 5 pages of concept art depict different stages of the cordyceps on animal hosts. There is a giraffe covered in mushroom plates, a gorilla exhibiting the stalker fungal growths from the face, a bear with a bloater's head growths, and a lion and a wolf with fungal plates breaking out of its skull, similar to a clicker. The final illustration paints a horrifying picture. What appears to be an early rat king, this was supposed to be an infected elephant that would rampage through the city trying to attack Joel. While all of these would definitely increase the terror of the outbreak, it would also conflict with the theme of preserved nature. In the final version of both games, animals were given immunity to the fungus. The only mention of a potential infected animal is in part 1 when Joel and Ellie pass through the Eastern Colorado University. A firefly scientist was attempting to create a cure by infecting monkeys with different strains of the cordyceps. Eventually, they pushed their luck too far and was bitten by a tainted primate. They would then end their life in order to avoid becoming infected. This might have been in vain, however, since it doesn't seem like the monkeys fully developed into runners and stalkers. But given the vastness of the infection and how much it spread across America, there could be a chance that there are some infected animals out there, but as of right now, animals cannot be infected with the cordyceps. Ellie knew the cure would kill her. This one is unique since it comes from Troy Baker, the actor for Joel Miller. He claims that Ellie always knew that creating a cure from a mutated fungus would kill her. She knew the risks and decided to still go along with the surgery. However, it seems this one is mostly disregarded by the general community. According to certain interviews and podcasts, Baker seems to have a slight misunderstanding about The Last of Us story. This theory also wouldn't line up with Joel and Ellie's dialogue throughout the game. She frequently tells Joel that once they're done with the cure business, they can do whatever Joel wants. By this point in the relationship, Ellie knows about Sarah and her death. Why would Ellie give Joel false hope about having a second chance of raising a daughter if she knew that she would die in order for the cure to be made? Overall, it seems Baker was just proposing a unique what if, even if it does seem misguided. The Last of Us is all Sarah's dream. A stereotypical theory, this one revolves around Sarah being the one to dream the entire events of The Last of Us. It claims that once Joel laid Sarah in her bed to allow her to sleep, she had this crazy dream about infected humans running around and paramilitary groups attempting to take control. She also dreamt of her own death and imagined Joel connecting to Ellie as a way to cope. Later, Sarah decided to shake up the dream and kill off her father. This would then lead to a revenge plot which ended with Ellie's ambiguous fate. There were even more outlandish claims about why Sarah dreamed certain characters and imagined them in certain ways. Ellie was a sister Sarah always wanted to bond with, Joel and Ellie traveling across the country with Sarah imagining a great adventure with her father, and Abby was the name of an older girl that used to bully Sarah, hence why Abby is such a brute that managed to take out Joel. This is definitely one of the more strange theories created about The Last of Us, yet it feels like a cheap cop-out. All that drama and pain experienced by the characters just for it to be a little girl's imagination. Either way, this probably isn't true given how mature the story is. The cordyceps is supernatural. This theory is one that I could barely find any information about. There are brief mentions of it in the Last of Us subreddit, but outside of that I couldn't find much info. The closest thing I could connect this with is the idea that nature itself mutated the cordyceps fungus to allow it to transfer to humans. Nature created this strong strain as a way to fight back against humanity for all the centuries of abuse. Even then, this nature theory has very little info surrounding it. Maybe I didn't research it enough or I missed something, so feel free to correct me in the comments down below. With tier 6 finished, let's move on to the final tier. Ellie's immunity is making her violent. This one is the most intriguing one on this iceberg. It suggests that Ellie's mutated strain of the cordyceps is making her more susceptible to her violent impulses. In other words, her immunity is making Ellie a more violent person. The specifics are that the trauma she experienced at the hands of Abby and the WLF reactivated some of the infected cells, causing them to begin eating the part of her brain responsible for compassion. This is why she brutally kills Nora, Owen, and Mel. However, once she manages to finally remember Joel in a positive light, her mutated cordyceps loosens up, letting some of her compassion back. While certainly interesting, it really downplays what Ellie went through and what kind of relationship she had with Joel. If the mutated cordyceps basically had to hijack her brain in order for her to avenge Joel, then it takes away how important he really was to her. Both were alone in a world filled with pain. They relied on each other to keep themselves hopeful for the future. Having Ellie's light taken away turned her into the vengeful shell we see in the game. That was all a reaction to seeing her father figure die in front of her eyes, not from the cordyceps eating away at her compassion center. Ellie committed suicide after leaving the farm. A really dark one, this theory states that Ellie left the farm to walk into the woods and end herself. Unable to cope with losing everyone around her and ending up alone, Ellie would take her life. The evidence for this comes from a poem in a journal written after returning from Santa Barbara. The final passage reads as so: I could be in the woods, buried/left for the insects to clean, until the iron smell is gone, until I'm bleached and beautiful, ready to display. The poem can be summarized as Ellie's regret leaving Dina and JJ alone while she dealt with her trauma and PTSD. The final passage is Ellie claiming that her death would be better than her support. It's also speculated that Ellie intended to die on the trip to Santa Barbara, and that returning home was simply out of guilt for leaving Abby alive. Since the last we see of Ellie is her leaving the farm, this theory has some weight to it. While incredibly dark, it's one of the more plausible endings for the character of Ellie Williams. The Last of Us 2 original plot. Continuing with the dark concepts, this one proposes a scrap plot for The Last of Us Part 2. It states that Ellie was originally raped by the WLF in Jackson, and the rest of the story would follow her and Joel in Seattle igniting revenge. Evidence for this one can be summarized as pure speculation. The original trailers for the game showcase Ellie being held down by wolves while exclaiming, "Please stop." The trailers also hit her stomach, and whenever it was on screen, it was covered by a guitar, implying a pregnancy. This would lead some fans to even say that as Ellie grew more pregnant, the player would lose gameplay features such as jumping and crawling through tight spaces. The final piece of evidence is a stretch even by speculation standards. In Uncharted 4, you can find a poster of a pregnant woman. This woman is supposedly Ellie, so do with that what you will. Considering the strict development of The Last of Us Part 2, I doubt this plot was ever seriously considered by Naughty Dog. This theory was a case of over-speculation and not understanding what the trailers were trying to showcase. The Last of Us Part 2 is not canon. The most common theory about The Last of Us Part 2 is that the entire game is non-canon. Whether it's a bad dream by Ellie or it's Ellie tripping out while smoking with Dina, the theory states that nothing that happens in Part 2 was real. The evidence to support it? There is none. This entire theory was made by fans to cope with the controversial story. Even if you disagree with Neil Druckmann's decisions, it doesn't change the fact that Part 2 is canon to the overall story of The Last of Us. It's always fun looking at what the community comes up with when looking at their favorite characters and stories. While some theories are definitely more developed than others, they were all interesting nevertheless. If there's any more theories that you would like to see covered in the future, leave a comment down below. If there's enough, I'll compile them into a part 2. But for now, that's everything that I have. This has been Duke, stay safe, and peace out.